I can't leave this setup right now. This is closest to the router and all that.
Kalen's handling this so poorly. That's what makes me happy. He's so obnoxious about it.
From Brooklyn, New York, you are listening to Extra Time, driven by Continental. From Bed-Stuy, I'm Andrew Wiebe with my partners in soccer. From Brooklyn Heights, David Goss. From Clinton Hill, BK, Kalen Carr. And from Long Island City, Queens, up in the clouds, Matt Doyle. Boys, what's up? How you feeling? How you doing? I'm happy to be back. It feels kind of normal, somewhat normal, not normal at all, whatever.
Listen, I feel fortunate right now. I just watched Kalen's personal life crumble in the back of this show as we got ready to record. Doyle's got cats running around. Wiebe's got sick people all over the place. I just feel #blessed.
Yeah, for sure.
Guys, I'll say this. Doing this podcast twice a week, taking up 75% of my living quarters in utter silence. We're making sacrifices. Everybody's making sacrifices for this show to happen.
We are here for you. Look, some news to get you started. We have so much to talk about today that is based in the past, and that's kind of the way it's going to be. We're doing our Mount Rushmore for every single team in Major League Soccer, maybe even circling back to get some of those extinct teams. Can I call it Chivas USA? Can I get Chalice on the board? Fusion, Mutiny? We might get to those, but today we've got three for you. The Houston Dynamo, the Fighting Kalen Cars, DC United, and then Toronto FC. So we'll run through those. We'll choose the best team of all time from those teams. And at the end of all this, whenever that might come, we'll have a bracket to crown that team the best all-time team in MLS history. So we'll get to that. We have some good mail from you as well. But the news, we all know what's going on. We all know why we're here, why we're not in the places we normally are. COVID-19, the MLS moratorium on team training has been extended to Friday, April 3rd. Players have been expected to remain in their local markets, but they can now request to leave by car in certain circumstances. And also the suspension of play, which happened on March 12th, which feels like 2 lifetimes ago. I mean, I can barely remember that happening at this point. This week, it's extended the suspension in play and guidance with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to set a target return date of May 10th, which is more than a month away. So still some waiting to do for live soccer, but at this point, that's honestly not the most important thing in the world. Before we get going, I just want to, because I feel like this is a community, because so many people have reached out to me, because this show honestly is like a family to me. I know all of you have reached out to me and asked what you can do for my family and so many other people by Twitter and otherwise. Look, last Thursday was the most normal I've felt during this pandemic. At the same time, my wife was very sick. I was sick before that. She tested positive for COVID-19, in case you hadn't seen that. The only reason I said it, we would have suffered in silence, was because people need to understand that this can hit them, that this is very serious, that this isn't something happening in a universe far, far away that can never reach out and touch you and your family or your friends. Wrap your heads around it. There's only one way we're going to be safe, and if that's what we do the best thing for each other. Continue to social distance, continue to quarantine if you feel sick, continue to do what's being recommended by all the agencies and scientists and medical professionals out there who are risking themselves for other people who have this disease. And make no mistake, there are a lot of people that do. We're all in New York City. We see the news. We see what's happening. I was fortunate. If I had it, I can't get tested like so many other people. It was just a 3-day bug. For my wife, it was much longer. For my wife, it was days and nights of worrying that it was going to accelerate. So don't think because you're young and healthy, don't think because the odds say it won't be you that it can't be. That's what I'm trying to tell you here, is that we have to do what we have to do, which is starve access to each of us for this virus. You don't want to play the odds. You don't want to look at your parents. You don't want to look at your partner. You don't want to look at yourself in the mirror and say, 3 out of 100, what could happen? It's not going to be me. I know it's painful. I know people are struggling. I know that financially this is different, that our society is different, that this is boring and hard and all those things. Just trust the science. Sacrifice if you got to sacrifice. We're all doing it. We got to flatten the curve. We need herd immunity. Let's do what's right for each other, for the herd. So stay in, socially distance, quarantine yourself. Support the people around you. I just want to say thank you one last time to all of you guys, Anders, Chris Karen, our other producer on this, David, Kaylin, Doyle, everybody in Major League Soccer. They've really supported me, and everybody who listens to this show. I truly do think it's a family. It feels like a family to me. It's the best thing I do every week, work-wise, and I'm really happy to be back. So that's my rambling spiel. We can talk some soccer. We can have some fun.
Andrew, I just want to say I second everything you said, and because we're a family, I just want you to know that we are, one, congratulating you on announcing that you are going to have your second baby boy. So big up to you.
Nice.
And that Mindy has given us permission to name that child after the 4th addition to the Houston Dynamo Mount Rushmore. So you are about to potentially have a Stuart Holden or a Joseph Nguyen in your apartment.
Oh, wow. You know what? Nguyen has a ring to it. I'm not going to lie. Has a ring to it. I could be down for that. Look, here's what I'm hoping for. I want a 6 and an 8. That's what I need in about 20 years from now. Double pivot. You know what? We'll let these other kids out there pull the strings, be the number 10s. We're messing people up, baby. We're getting into the 50-50s. We're moving the ball to the right places. We have iron lungs, this Weeby clan.
Oh, gosh.
And by
I just got a window into your kids' view of and I'm thinking soccer may not be it.
Right now, it's all about trucks. So, you know what? If it's an engineer or whatever it is, fine. But we are very happy here. Happy that my wife is recovering, seems to be okay. Happy about the new addition to come soon in July. So thanks for that, Dave. You want to do this? Let's get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. Mount Rushmore and the greatest MLS team of all time. It's the 25th season. We have no actual games to talk about. So this is where we are, reminiscing, bantering, having fun. We'll start with sort of the ground rules here. 4 spots. We've decided they're all for players. There is a coaching spot. Dave, you can explain how that coaching spot is being honored as you eat couscous. Maybe I timed that a little bit wrong. There's an observation deck. That will be named for the coach.
David, you can't stop eating for an hour?
I thought I had a couscous opening.
It's not even lunchtime yet. It's like 11 a.m.
I skipped breakfast.
On
because
March
I thought we'd have a quick
Thursday.
meeting to go into this.
Yeah, you should have known better. So
there'll be 4 players, of course, being erected. And then when you walk up the trail to look out on the Mount Rushmore of your club, you stand at an observation deck that will be named after your number 1 all-time coach.
And then at the end of this, we will decide the greatest team to go into the bracket.
And maybe like a bench as a GM or something.
Yeah, something like that, like in the background.
The snack stand.
Outside of the spotlight for that one. We saw your tweets, everyone, as we put out for nominees. Thank you so much for your contributions. We'll read some of those, and thank you to the clubs for jumping on board as well as we do our best to celebrate these folks that really made MLS history, who set the foundation for these clubs as well as our league. Before we get to this, can I just have a real quick aside about Mount Rushmore?
He's been reading Miss Howard Zinn.
Yeah, I've been,
United
you know
States.
what, look, I'm a big history guy. I used to think I only read history books about humans treating each other badly, and then I realized that is just history. It's just the history of humans treating each other badly. That's the current that flows throughout, and that applies to the U.S. government, of course. Look, if you don't know the history of Mount Rushmore and why this is an issue to the Sioux Nation, it's because basically the land was taken away from them. They signed a treaty. They thought they had the land. There was gold discovered in the Black Hills. And then, what do you know? That treaty wasn't honored. It got taken away from them. That treaty was supposed to be in perpetuity. Perpetuity means forever. It was not forever. And then, of course, you know about Custer and Wounded Knee and massacres and displacement and reservations. And then in 1927, some guy from Connecticut rolled up and chiseled a bunch of presidents in their sacred ground. So yeah, you'd be pretty frustrated too if you were the Sioux. This is, I hope, educating you. I didn't know this whole story. So built on land the U.S. government took from the Sioux. Black Hills are considered sacred ground, and the monument celebrates some folks that did some not so great things to Native Americans. There you go. It's not great. Don't love the history of it. Do love the way that it can help frame this conversation. But now you know, we'll remind you there's some bad history here. Let's just call it the 4 spots for the Houston Dynamo. 4 spots on an unnamed mountain that is going to honor these great, great individuals. And Kaylin, We'll let you get us started after I lay down the foundation for the Dynamo. You remember they started in 2006. They moved from San Jose. The Earthquakes were Supporters' Shield winners in 2005. They were already a very, very good team. And then the Dynamo won MLS Cups in their first 2 seasons, 2006, 2007. They were runners-up. Kalen, I know this always comes up. 2011, 2012, MLS Cup runners-up in LA against the Galaxy. Won U.S. Open Cup. We were there for that in 2018, an awesome moment at BBVA Compass Stadium. And they were Superliga runners-up in 2008. Let's go. Know your history. Remember your history. They've also made the playoffs in 8 of 14 seasons. So started at Robertson Stadium, went to BBVA Compass Stadium. That's the long and the short of it. So get out your chisel, Kalen. Who's number one? Who's going up on the honorees first for the Houston Dynamo?
I've been agonizing over this list in general, I have to be honest, but I will say that the first choice was pretty easy with Brian Ching, the big kahuna, one of my favorite teammates and close friends. But I just think from the first day of the club came there, the first game, we scored 4 goals in the opener. So that was quite the announcement of what this club was going to be and the sort of success that would be built by that group, but led by Brian Ching. He's still number 1 in goals all time for the club, although Mauro Manotas will have something to say about that pretty soon, which makes this list so hard because you've got guys like that sneaking up and still a ways to go. But Brian, I mean, through that first season, he had big moments, big goals, 2006 goal of the year, bicycle kick. Of course, the MLS Cup MVP with the winner that we just watched the replay of on MLS YouTube Classics the other night. They go to back-to-back championships, then, sticks through the club. It represents the club at the World Cup for the men's national team. Then continues to carry the team forward into this next generation of success, I would say, in 11-12, going back where I got to play with him up top. So, and then on just beyond that, off the field, he was a champion in the community as well, building houses for people in need, and is still a huge figure in the club. I would argue that in Houston, he might be on the just like a general sports Mount Rushmore. Like if you go through Olajuwon and Nolan Ryan, if you were to go through Houston, he is that big of a figure around town as far as people know who he is. He's helped make that club relevant from day one and usher into a new stadium. So Brian, one of the best guys you'll meet too, and a good friend of mine, of course. So easy choice for number 1, but I wanted to make sure that we gave him his due.
Yeah, I think Brian Ching, he's sort of this confluence of the 2 factors that can get you into this position, right? It's both on the field, which is individual and collective, but it's also off the field. Like you have to have legacy, and that's part of this exercise is who was able to build a legacy as a player, but also as a person and a personality within cities. And you really have to combine the 2 to weasel your way onto these sort of honorary
and part
lists.
of it too, exactly to that point. Like if you go to, I know Brian McBride, one of my old teammates, has a pub outside of Fulham's ground in London, and we haven't seen a ton of that happen in MLS yet. But Chingy's got Pitch 25 right across the street, so I went back for their home opener, sold out against LA Galaxy and Chicharito, and before and after the game, everybody goes to Pitch 25. So he's fully entrenched himself as a fixture of that community, and I think obviously his legacy will be there for a long time.
And just toss out, and not necessary for this conversation, but over 40 caps. Kalen mentioned, went to the 06 World Cup. I always remember the PK he drew, of course, in the 07 final that brought the U.S. back into it against Mexico. And him and Landon playing the way they played in that second half got the U.S. back into it, which led to the Benny Feilhaber goal. So, had those peak moments at the national team level for everyone in MLS to root for, but also dominated for the Dynamo.
And when I start my fictional expansion club in Hawaii, which we may get to at some point, of course, Brian will be involved in the ownership group.
I don't know. I don't know if we need to get to that. It seems kind of extraneous, extra. You already did that, Kalen.
You guys, I'm going to take that up with you guys later.
Doyle, you got a name here? Who absolutely has to be on this thing?
It's weird because with these top 4 players for each club, I'm going to tend, I think, towards going with guys who spent the bulk of their career with the club, or at least the plurality of their career. Dwayne De Rosario did not. He was only with the Dynamo for 3 seasons, but in those 3 seasons, he was consensus probably the second best domestic attacker in the league, behind only Landon Donovan. I don't like Brian Ching was Mr. Dynamo, but I don't think anybody at that time was arguing that Brian Ching was actually the better player. It was Dero who was the better player. He played the number 10 at the point of the diamond. Sometimes he played as a second forward off of Ching. He scored game-winning goal in the 2007 MLS Cup. And when you think about this player, I mean, he had better numbers later in his career, 1 season with Toronto and then 1 or 2 seasons with DC. But when you think of Dwayne De Rosario, you probably think of the Houston Dynamo, and I think that's correct. I think that he was the best player on the team that won back-to-back MLS Cups. And for those of you who came to the league after Dero retired, or after he, or when he started to decline, go back and find yourself some highlight reels, because he has as spectacular a highlight reel as anyone in league history. Some of the greatest goals this league has ever seen. And he had like a Clint Dempsey or Clint Mathis levels. Like he was the Canadian Clint Dempsey in how he presented himself on the field, and an absolute legend of this league and an absolute legend for this club.
And when you start a new team and you want fans to come in, that was what people wanted to see. It was like sauce on the field. Dero played the game the right way, was fun to watch. Robertson would rock and jump when he was on. And for me, players like that, if you can do it in big moments, it means it's real. It's not you're up 3-0 in the middle of the summer and you mega guy. It's MLS Cup finals where it's like, yeah, I'm just going to like Rabona right here, take this guy 1v1 for no reason. It's just who he was. And I got into the league. And when I got into the league, watching Dero was like, oh my God, this is what soccer is, and this is how I want to watch it be played.
I just wanted to see him between the lines. Like, I wanted to see those moments when he picked up the ball and maybe his back was the goal, or maybe he was on the half turn. And then 2 steps later, he's in a position that nobody should be shooting from and he's putting in the corner. Or 5 steps in, he's past like 2 of your dudes and you're just like, give me the celebration. And that's the other thing. Like, you talk about icons. There are more aspects to showing your personality than just the banger. And I think that Dwayne understood that and still understands that. But like him showing who he is and what he's about and how he can bring that out on the field changes the way people perceive him. And like, I can still see that, like, is there a more iconic celebration in the league than the slow-mo, the Dero? There's not.
I don't know. At least might be, stepping into that legacy as well too now. But yeah, similar vibe.
He's got a ways to go. He's got a ways to go to match Dero.
What a legend. And we all have seen the free kick goal. I mean, he did it for San Jose, and then he became really sort of the shining light with the Dynamo. So Dwayne De Rosario, the second name on the list. I think the top 3 are pretty easy, Dave, and I'm going to guess where you're going, but we'll let you do the honors.
Well, Doyle started off his by saying longevity would be most of what he would double back on. So Brad Davis, 14 years in MLS, 9 of them with the Houston Dynamo. He's 3rd all-time in assists in MLS history with 123. 105 of those were for the Dynamo. 43 of his career goals were on that team. He was on the team through all of their MLS Cup appearances. So he has that experience, and he was an MVP candidate for the second 2 in 2011 and 2012. Went to a World Cup as well in 2014. You can talk to Kalen, and we were going to talk about it later tonight, but plans changed. But he was the fulcrum for those teams in 2011 and 2012. The attack went through that left side. That was the way they built their back line, to have Corey Ash overlap over him or underlap under him, whatever they needed. And he was consummate professional for the team, leader for the team, and I think helped bridge from one dynasty to another, whether you call it that or not, because I don't know if you don't win. If you call it that, I would, because my teams don't win, so I don't care. But he was that guy throughout the whole thing, and had 1 year at the end with SKC, which is a weird moment, but I think it's ignored, and he's a Houston Dynamo legend.
So did a lot of guys. Brad Evans. I mean, it's just like just kind of rolling through KC just to get a year of PV. Kaylin, I want to understand like the brilliance of Brad Davis from your perspective. seeing it every day, seeing it on game day, but also just seeing it on the training field.
Yeah, I mean, he had I think if you was watching these old MLS Cup performances, and Brad had incredible talent even early on with the Metro Stars, but I think and through San Jose, and then came through with Houston. But that's where I think in some ways the conversation was always about Ching and Dero, right? Like those were the big names on the team. And then it was kind of like Brad and Mullen and some of the other guys around it, and then Stu emerged and Jeff Cameron and some others. But Brad really stepped forward and played a little bit with a chip on his shoulder. I think that was part of his game that was always strong. Always served a great ball, but I think in some ways he served such a good ball that similarly to almost to David Beckham, people seem to only define him by his service, and especially on like a dead ball. And Brad had so much more to his game from the run and play. We switched to a 4-3-3, and he would play inside and be our best central midfielder and creator in the middle of the pitch in possession. People think that in set pieces with our Dynamo teams that we would sit and just repetition. I've never had such a short set piece training than when Brad was on the field. Dom would lay the ball out and be like, all right, let's take a couple set pieces over here, set up a fake wall. Or even if we used actual like second team players in the wall, nobody was nervous because you knew it was going straight over up into the corner. And then he would say something to Tally Hall about it. But it was just, and then Dom would be like, all right, cool, let's take a corner kick, do the same thing, whip it in. Bobby Boswell scores, and it's like, all right, I think we're good. He was just so talented to be able to do that. Big game player, a winner. That whole mentality of the team was that way through this list of guys I got to play with Ching and Brad specifically. But yeah, Brad, I think third all time in assists stands out to me in MLS history, just behind Ralston and Landon. So I think in some ways Brad is still underrated, and so he was just such an obvious choice for this sort of pantheon of Houston Dynamo greats.
I like that word, pantheon. So the pantheon, 3 of 4 completed. Brian Ching, Dwayne De Rosario, Brad Davis, one spot left, and a lot of deserving candidates over the years for the Houston Dynamo. I mean, if you're talking best 11 over the years, you have Rico Clark. He was there in 2006 and there for a long, long time. Even came back and retired as a member of the Dynamo, which you absolutely love to see. Eddie Robinson. And for those of you that missed the Eddie Robinson experience, go back and watch that, because that is how you play old. I think Troy Dyack in the same kind of breath. Like, that's how you play this old school MLS center back. Gonna mess you up. Gonna be sort of a physical presence. Gonna be in your head. He was best 11 in 2007. Jeff Cameron in 2009. Stu Holden in 2009 as well. Both of them a little bit shorter because they moved on. Brad Davis got that thing in 2011. But Pat Onstad didn't get one. Pat Onstad has to be in this conversation. Kaylin, I know you've struggled. I know you've sort of like soul searched through this process. So dig deep inside of yourself. Who are you nominating for this 4th spot in the Houston Dynamo Pantheon / Mount Rushmore?
Well, I was hoping we could do coaches because I was like, oh, if we just add Dom to this, then I don't have to make any tough decisions. And I think Dom, of course, is deserving, building that franchise. But yeah, you rattled off a lot of the names. I think Pat Onstad should definitely be up there as far as him leading them to 2 titles. And if you look at his performances in the big matches and especially in the finals with the penalty saves. What an incredible goalkeeper he was. Ricardo Clark, Rico, for me, stands out. I think he's second all-time in appearances for the club. Stu Holden, yes, a short amount of time, but I can tell you his talent and his ability and his impact during that time. Even I was laughing at the rewind of the 2006 final where he steps up and Eric Winalda's like, oh, I don't know, this young kid looks nervous. And then he just bangs it into the upper corner. Should tell you something about Stu. I think the other part of it too is he's from Sugar Land, Texas, grew up in Houston. So he's a hometown boy. has come back throughout his time and injuries and rehabbed in Houston. And then, of course, continues to go back as an ambassador and has done a lot of charitable work there. His mom is still at every single Houston Dynamo game. And brother played for the club as well. So he's up there. You got to mention Bobby Boswell alongside Eddie Robinson. Bobby was one of the best leaders I ever played with. I think partly he's a little tough one for me just because he's split, I think, in a lot of ways with DC United as such a big figure for that club as well, too. And Wade Barrett was a longtime captain as well as interim head coach and was the assistant for a long time under me. So that's the list. I ultimately keep getting
the Boniek
back
twins.
to the quietest.
The Boniek.
What's that?
The Boniek twins.
Oh, and
the
I did
Boniek
mention
twins.
Boniek, which, oh my goodness, thank you.
No, forget about Boniek.
Boniek twins. We may need to create more space for the Boniek twins. There's like, can they operate the two of them together may need their own statue. But yeah, Boniek as well. I mean, he came in 2012 and has been such a fixture of that. I think he's second all time in assists, just behind Brad Davis, which we've obviously talked about him. And I think also as far as like ushering forward this next era of Dynamo players, and just they call him El Presidente. He has been the one fixture there. But I'm going to go back to Ricardo Clark as my fourth. I think when you look at he was best 11 in 2006. He actually didn't play in either MLS Cup final. He was injured in 2006 and then I think suspended for 2007. But I just think when I look at his time with the club, stayed with them all the way through 2009, where I think he left just before the World Cup to Europe, but went on, played in the World Cup in 2010, and then came back in 2012 when I was there, and then went back to MLS Cup again there. Just 253 appearances for the club. I think that's second all time, and just a leader, I think, in his own way, a quiet leader, and is still involved with the club. So I think Rico, to me, another player that I think has been underrated as far as his ability and impact in his career. But I think he when I think of Houston Dynamo, he's one of the people that I think of. So I would give it to Rico.
And also, let's put the cherry on top of that, which is didn't play in an MLS Cup because he was suspended because he kicked Carlos Ruiz, who was on FC Dallas at the time, which we don't condone violence on this show. But if you're going to get suspended, it might as well be for taking out a star player of your biggest rival.
No.
Doyle, this is how I play the game. This is how the game plays.
Maybe a cult hero in Houston. Yeah, you could say that privately in a Houston watering hole. But yeah.
Oh, my God.
I mean, I think it's between Rico and Pat.
Yeah.
Doyle,
I mean, Pat Onstad was great. He won a lot with San Jose. He actually played more for San Jose than he did for Houston. When I started thinking about it, it was Pat Onstad, it was Bobby Boswell. I thought about Cameron and Stu because they're both such talented players, but they both moved on so quickly. Neither one really had a defining moment with Houston. But in the end, it is Rico Clark. He was there for the start of that Dynamo. I mean, he was there in San Jose before they were even the Dynamo, and he was one of the keys to them launching as one of the best defining clubs in the league for that time. And then he came back and is, I think, going to try to be a big part of building this next generation for the Dynamo via the academy. So I think that's the right call.
Oh, add Mateo, his son, to the future legends list too, because he is a young baller at the academy.
Speaking of, so I think we all agree on Rico Clark, right?
Yeah. So we got the four. We got Rico, we got Brian Ching, Brad Davis, Dwayne De Rosario. We have the Dom Kinnear observation deck and the Boniek twins snack stand.
So real quick, is it Rico Clark Wiebe? Is it Ricardo Wiebe? Is it Rico Wiebe? Like, how are we fitting that in?
I don't hate Rico Wiebe. I don't hate it. Well,
you are welcome. We just took so much off your plate.
We'll put it out there. Yeah. She's still going for Lake and River, and I told her that I refuse to name the kid after a body of water. It's not happening.
Not as close to River.
All right. right, so we got our pantheon for the Dynamo. What's the best team in Dynamo history? Who's going into the bracket? Who's competing to be the all-time greatest? Is it 06? Is it 07? Both those teams are champions. Champions League. They went to the semifinals in 07.
What's your argument of 06 over 07?
I don't think I have one. I think it is, to me, 07. You could argue it was 08 in the regular season, but they didn't get it done in the playoffs. So to me, it's 07. But I just think across the board, they did more. They almost won an Open Cup in 06 as well. Doyle, you're maybe in the best position to sort of make a final vote on this.
Yeah, my gut reaction was 06 because they had that was the team that had just won the Supporter Shield in San Jose the previous year, but they actually got deeper in 07 because I think as Stu came into his own a little bit more, some of those younger guys started stepping up. So I do think 07 is the right one, the right call. They finished second in the West behind Chivas USA. They finished third in the Shield standings, just 3 points off winning what would have been their second Shield in 3 years. They did win back-to-back MLS Cups, and I think it speaks to the depth of this team that they played that MLS Cup without Brian Ching. Mm-hmm. They won 2007 MLS Cup without Brian Ching, who did not play in that game, and they actually came from behind. Taylor Twellman scored, I think, 20th minute, and they got second-half goals from
say his name,
Joseph Higuain, and then D-Row got the game winner. So I think the 2007 Houston team is the best Houston team of all time.
Yeah, and Brad got injured in that season as well too, and that's where it gave Stu a big opening to really, and he started to really push on, and I think starting to catch the eye of Europe as well. So yeah, I like that.
Also, I don't know how we're allowed to do this or what the rules are in time and space, but Chris Wondolowski was on the bench for that team. He didn't play for 7 more years, but technically, if you go back now,
led the reserve team led the reserve league in scoring that year.
I watched that I was watching the 06 final, and on the bench for that team, Dempsey was coming off an injury, so it was Dempsey, Lorenowitz on one side, and then it was Stu Holden, Chris Wondolowski. I think James Riley was on the bench there was a bunch, the benches on both of those teams. And when I've been watching all these MLS classics in general, the benches in general are ridiculous.
Even Andy Dorman, a bench player for New England, and goes on to be best 11.
Thank you for the Andy Dorman reference.
Yeah, sucks to be you though, but yeah.
All right, so Houston Dynamo.
Also, shout out to Jeff Renowitz for still being in MLS. Watching MLS Classics in 2006, I was like, wow, it's incredible.
Kalen, do you want to make any argument for 2012?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, those don't. No, we're gonna go through the 2012 and 2011 separately. But I will say that those early teams were a big part, still had a big influence on our group. And those guys set those. All due respect to those early teams because they set the standard. So when you showed up, you knew that was what the standard was supposed to be. Along with Dom Kinnear, who I know are sidestepping coaches, but when you look at best MLS,
there's no other choice for Houston. Dom Kinnear was easily the best guy, and along with Bruce and Jason Kreis, the best coach of that era.
Yeah, and Ziggy.
Yeah. Sorry, Zig.
So, speaking of Bruce, let's do DC United, and we're observing from the Bruce Arena observation deck here, setting the scene for what is one of the, if not the best clubs in MLS history. The trophy case is absolutely chock full for DC United. Look, you know how it went for them. You had 96, 97, 99, 2004 MLS Cups. You had 4 Supporters Shield, 97, 99, 2006, 2007. You have 3 Open Cups, 96, 08, 2013. You've got the CONCACAF Champions Cup in 98. So that first 3 seasons for DC United, the bouncing stands, Bruce, Harkes, Pope, Echeverry, Moreno, Diaz Arce, on and on, Agus. I mean, you could go through that entire team and just not run out of names to call out. Let's get right into it. And there are two guys that we've decided have to be on their pantheon, on their Mount Rushmore. And Doyle, let's get it started with Diablo.
Yeah, the best player on the best, still the best dynasty this league has ever seen. You listed off all the stuff they won in those first 4 years. You didn't even mention the Intercontinental Cup, which is short-lived, and I wish they would bring it back. The MLS Cup champion played the Copa Libertadores champion in '98. It was Vasco da Gama. Like Juninho was on that, like the Juninho was on that team. A bunch of other great guys. That, like, watching DC United, watching an MLS team go toe-to-toe with the Copa Libertadores champions, it was spectacular. That team for 4 straight years was spectacular. Diablo was at the heart of it. He is one of the definitive, classic South American number 10s, in that he could not move and absolutely carve you up. You didn't have to move. You just play him the ball, and you surround him with 3 guys, and he would just turn his hips a little bit, not even touch the ball, and eliminate one defender because he sold it so well, and he was so at home with the ball. And then, of course, carve you up with these perfect through balls. But he was also more than that. I've been going back and watching a lot of the games from 96, 97, 98. He worked hard off the ball to, as soon as a defender turned his head, Diablo was moving. Diablo was going to exactly where that guy did not think he was going to be, and presenting himself. So he always found the ball in so much space, and once you give a player of that quality that much space, you're going to get hurt. The framing that I think really works is to understand that he came over in his prime. He was 26 or 27 years old when he signed with DC United. And he had just been top 3 finisher for South American Player of the Year. And this was, before there was this complete mass exodus of South American players to Europe. Finishing top 3 for South American Player of the Year and then coming to MLS, that's the type of thing, if, we have players who do that now, we cover that like a blanket for MLSsoccer.com for months on end, because it's still such a Marco Etcheverry was the mold. And I, as a day one fan of this league, I was waiting 20 years for us to get back to signing that type of player, and then we finally did. If you dropped him into MLS now, he would still be an MVP caliber player, and he would do it Marco Etcheverry in DC is like Joseph Martinez in Atlanta. He meant something in a really big and a really freaking cool way to that fan base and to that city's sporting culture. There is no one else. DC's had a lot of great players. There is no one else you could have started this list with.
Here are those first 4 seasons, 3 MLS Cup wins in those seasons for Marco Etcheverry. In case you're like, oh, yeah. 23 starts, 4 goals, 19 assists in 96. 19 starts, 3 goals and 11 in 97. 29 starts, 10 in 19, and then 22, 4 and 17. I mean, he was doing whatever he wanted. Dave, I still remember when we did the Extra Time Live at RFK with Marco, with Jaime Moreno, and just feeling in awe, feeling like I could, this was a person that I just interviewed David Beckham. That impacted me more than the Beckham thing by far. He just had something about him. There was a swagger still just ingrained in Marco Etcheverry, and I was trying to imagine the whole time what it would be like to share a locker room with this guy, what it would be like to watch him do what he was born to do on a daily basis, and what a wonderful thing it was. He was an absolute legend. I actually made a mistake here. I said we had 2 names. We actually have 3 names to go on. And Kaylin, I'm going to go with the second one and throw it to you. I think this one's obvious. Jaime Moreno, on top of the scoring list for so long until Landon Donovan knocked him off. But you can't think of DC without including Jaime Moreno.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 133 goals. I think that's now 4th all time, and 102 assists. I think he's one that the 100 club I think is rare. Doyle, do you have any others in there?
I think probably Landon. I think Landon is the only other one who's 100. Yeah.
Does Kai not have 100 assists?
Kai's got about 50.
Okay. He should if they. Yeah, he gave up the penalty to Higuain. That should count. If he gave up, that should be an assist.
Look. Kai's in the 110,000 club. 100 goals, 10,000 shots. All right, you got to shoot to score, baby.
But yeah, Jaime, I mean, was there from those early dynasty days, of course, and then also, I think he dipped out for like a year, and then
the Metro Stars.
Did he go?
Got hurt.
Yeah.
Got hurt. Played like one game. Destroyed that team's chemistry and cap space for a year, and then went back to DC.
So if your greatest hero can't play villain at the rival club, I mean, that's gonna count for something extra there. Then he comes back to DC. I played against him in those supporter shield teams. That was 607 for DC when he was there, just killing it. And yeah, his mobility maybe was a little bit limited then, but when I talked to the best, all of our center backs, I can promise you, who are now managers, whether CJ Brown or Jim Curtin and these guys, like they knew how good. When you hear center backs talking about strikers with the reverence that they talk about him, I mean, you could never rush him at any point in time. It seemed like he always had an extra moment or two in the box, or just when you thought you maybe had him surrounded, he was always able to find a way out. Very cool finisher in and around the box. Just incredible quality from Jaime. And so, I mean, it's the numbers speak for themselves, but I would say he's also one of those guys that had a little bit of style or panache to his game that young fans should definitely look up some Jaime Moreno highlights.
That's 2 out of 3. There's a third, Dave. It's a pretty obvious one too.
I'm excited about this one though because I played center back growing up, and my hero was Eddie Pope. So I'm fortunate that I get to be the one who gives his pitch. 143 appearances for the club, struggled with injuries towards the end of his time with DC, so isn't up there crazy in those numbers, but came out of college, got drafted, and then immediately was a starter for this team. Won MLS Cup in 1996. You mentioned all the trophies this team won. He basically scored in every final that you mentioned. He scored the golden goal in 1996 to win the first ever MLS Cup. He scored in Open Cup that year to win it. And then he scored in the CONCACAF Champions, the winner, in 1998. That's for a guy who also won Defender of the Year in 1997 and was 2-time Best 11, lockdown starter immediately. Spent his first year with the Olympic team a little bit and back with DC United, so didn't have as many appearances that first year, but obviously was there in the final, and then went on to be, I think, the greatest center back in U.S. national team history. Started every game in the 2002 World Cup run, started in 2006 and 98 as well for the team, 82 caps, led the Players Union, is that type of guy. I actually ran into him when he was put into the U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame, which is a thing that I don't even know exists anymore. Because it's not the National Soccer Hall of Fame. He got the award at a game, and I ran into him in the concourse and was like, hey, man, congratulations. Like, no one knew who he was, which kind of drove me nuts. He's just walking through the concourse, I think, at Red Bull Arena. And I just went up and was like, hey, man, I'm a huge fan. Like, congrats. And he was the nicest person I've ever met and talked to me and talked about soccer and defending and all the things you do. And so I've always been a huge fan of his. It's the first jersey I bought. And I think was the best defender on those great DC United teams, and was there long enough. Unfortunately, also spent some time with the Metro Stars because it was just chaos back then and everyone played for every team. So you get to ignore it for a lot of these guys. But yeah, he's a legend off the field and a legend on the field.
Let me just add a couple of things. For Jaime Moreno, if you want the best comparison to a starting number 9 in MLS today, it would probably be Eber. Like what Eber did last year for NYCFC, Jaime Moreno did that for like 10 straight years. Well, with a 1-year break for DC United. And then for Eddie Pope, saying he's the best defender in U.S. history actually sells it short. After the 98 World Cup, he had legitimate offers from Feyenoord, from AC Milan, and this is when Serie A was still arguably the best league in the world, and Borussia Dortmund, who had just won their only Champions League. Legitimate offers from all three of these clubs, and he turned them down because, to him, having the chance to build the league here and make a long-term mark here, which he has unquestionably done, was maybe the most important thing. So Eddie Pope, not just on this list for DC United, but for U.S. soccer and MLS as a whole. He's basically the defender version of Landon Donovan.
Would you think you could do then in that case, would you name the MLS Defender of the Year award after him?
So I would consider it, but it's tough because the reason why we don't remember as much of Eddie Pope is because he spent so much time hurt. He just didn't have that durability. And you could say that his apex was higher than any other center back in league history, including guys like Carlos Bocanegra. But if you compare it to like Chad Marshall, the Defender of the Year award, if it's going to be named after anybody, it should be named after Chad Marshall. What Eddie did for especially those first 4 years, I don't think it's been topped yet.
And if you're talking about longevity, you got to go back to Jaime as well. I don't think we mentioned it, but he came when he was young. You kind of talk about Marco as this sort of paragon. This is what we want. This is what this league needs. Well, this era of young star South Americans, I mean, Jaime Moreno was that before, Miguel Almiron was that. It was just that he stayed here. His legacy was built here, and the move didn't necessarily come. Not because of talent. He definitely had that. So you have to acknowledge.
You could say maybe that DC United invented the blueprint that Atlanta United are only now using, but I wouldn't.
Look, Darren Eales, he had been in like the Northeast. He went to Brown. He probably had an idea. He was watching those DC teams. We got 3 out of 4 from the Bruce Arena observation deck. We see Marco Echeverri being chiseled in the sky. We see Jaime Moreno. We see Eddie Pope, and then now it gets real hard because number 4 has a laundry list of folks. I mean, we talked about the John Harks of the world, the Jeff Aguses of the world. I think you can throw Raul Diaz-Arce in here. He scored like 38 goals in 3 years for them. But Freddie Adu. Freddie Adu. Yes. But look, Bill Hamid probably has to be there. And then the elephant in the room here is Ben Olsen. If you're talking about combination of on-field, off-field, in the community, cult figure, coach, I mean, how do you choose? And then Christian Gomez, who my gut, my soul says should be here. How do you make this fourth decision? Dave, what would you weigh this on? What is most important to you as we try to, in vain probably, choose a fourth for DC United?
So I would say for picking this, I would go based on, we got an incredible reaction on social media from all the fans. A lot said Ben Olsen, and I think that's where you have to lean because cult figure matters. But I'm with you, Weeby, in that in my experience, I was a huge Christian Gomez fan. He was the South American 10 that I came into the league watching, and him and Jaime Moreno, and you mentioned before the show, Luciano Emilio, those guys getting it done, and Andy Nahar on the wing, like those teams to me were peak teams in MLS, and I loved Christian Gomez. But if the fans are saying Ben Olsen, he was rookie of the year, he was the type of player you wanted to watch when he was healthy, and now he's been around the club. He's the second longest tenured coach in MLS now at this point. I think you have to lean that way.
The argument for Gomez is a great one because he was there 4 years. They won an MLS Cup and 2 supporter shields in his 4 years when he had the keys to the car. That's really, really good. Ben Olsen, 250 games as a player with DC United, probably twice that many as a coach now, or closing in on twice that many as a coach now. We remember him as a hard-playing, gritty, not much flair, winger, wide midfielder / central midfielder. But the first 3 years before he did his ankle, to borrow the words of a DC United fan from back in the day. He was the winger we've always wanted and never had. Tidy on the ball, could combine centrally as much as go 1v1, creative and brave. He could have been the guy to break the mold. And I would argue with some of that, but I would also argue that he certainly was breaking the mold before he did his ankle. Yeah, that ankle injury that he suffered with Nottingham Forest, like that derailed what would have been a 120 cap type MLS or U.S. national team career. And if he had stayed in MLS, he would have been best 11 probably like 3 or 4 more times.
Yeah, and just before that, he in that MLS Cup, he was MLS Cup MVP in '99 as well too. So having the big moments as well, he was always a player for. And then later on in his career, but I think in some ways that injury also revealed something about his like mental strength, right? And like sort of adapted his game in the same way that maybe you would see for a club like Manchester United. I know it's tough to make the comparison, but like a Ryan Giggs type character, cold hero, but has adapted his game and became more, I would say, but Benny became more of a scrapper even later on in his career, but has brought that personality to his teams. And I think when you look also beyond the pitch, I think part of the reason why all the fans love him so much is just he's really a different type of person. He's a different type of coach, and the way he's involved in the community and there's really a part of it. It's like not something you see much in professional sports, period. So yeah, I would put and Christian Gomez was incredible. And DC is also one of those impossible teams to pick from because I'm thinking like Bill Hamid.
We're not even mentioning Bobby Boswell. Bobby Boswell had like 8 great years for DC United during 2 different eras. Like this team was Carlos Llamosa, Jeff Agoos. Like it's almost too much.
Ryan Nelson is a guy who kind of gets forgotten in the shadow of Eddie Pope in those early years, but was like a legend in MLS, won, and then went and did it elsewhere, and then came back. And let's say coaching didn't work out for him as well as it did for some other returning players in Major League Soccer. We had people throw his name out there. Of course, Bill Hamid from DC United fans. But I think Kevin
Did we
Payne,
say John Harkes at all?
I said John Harkes.
Okay.
It was only there 2 years.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm just saying that's the level of list we're talking about with this team.
Where Diaz Arce can't even get a sniff. You say his name, people are like, no. And this dude was like the man. I think Kevin Payne deserves a shout out here. I know we're not doing like executives, but Kevin Payne definitely deserves a shout for building and sort of shaping ultimately the most successful club in league history from the very, very jump, which I can only imagine at that time in the Wild Wild West. Are we unanimous here? Is it Ben Olsen? Are we putting him up there?
Yeah, I think so.
I say go for it. Yep.
Yeah.
It hurts me too, Dave. Christian Gomez was who I kind of got started on in this league as like a difference maker, MVP player, champion. But I think for everything that Ben Olsen has done, he's there. And now comes even the hardest part, probably. What's the best team? What is the best team in the history of this thing?
I'll go first. It's actually 98. The 98 team didn't win the Supporter Shield because the Galaxy ran away with it. The Galaxy scored like 90 goals that year, but they finished second. They didn't win MLS Cup because Bob Bradley had just masterful job with that Chicago Fire team, counterattacked DC to death. Didn't win the U.S. Open Cup because Bruce didn't really care about the Open Cup at that point, in my opinion. But they won the CONCACAF Champions Cup, and then they won that Intercontinental Cup against Vasco da Gama. And again, that was played at a neutral site, so it's not exactly representative. But that Vasco da Gama team might still be the very best team that any MLS team has beaten in any competition. They were loaded. And so to do that and to have guys like Jaime, like Diablo, Roy Lassiter was on the team by that point, Sane and Pope and Llamosa and Agoos, Richie Williams, we haven't even mentioned, who was probably the second or third best D-mid in the entire league for the first half decade. Having all those guys in their prime on that team, right in the midst of that run, to me, the 98 DC team he's the best of that bunch, even though it's kind of ironic they didn't win any of the domestic titles that year.
You know whose name we didn't mention in all this? Roy Lassiter.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that name mentioned.
It's because the list is too.
It's too much. Yeah, you get Bobby Convey, Eskandarian.
Well,
I mean, like.
But you also have. I think we're doing this across all of this, but when guys move teams, like Roy Lassiter wasn't a DC United player through everything. Similar, I think that partially affects the way Bobby Boswell went down, where Doyle said like he was great 2 separate times. If he had been there for 12 years and had his peak Houston years in DC and was part of that all the way through, I think he'd be on this list. So it becomes tough where you start talking about great players, but also club legends and club icons. And that's where you sort of have that little difference. On the one thing Doyle said, I fully get the 98 argument, and I think it's correct. I'm going to make a similar argument for Toronto FC coming up, but the problem for 98 was the CONCACAF Champions was in August and the Intercontinental was in November. So you can't connect it to 97, where nowadays, if you were to win CCL, like if LAFC were to win CCL this year on the normal timeline, you could have connected it to last year's team. Yeah. But I don't think you could have done that with those DC teams because of the calendar.
Can we, in good conscience, give a greatest of all time to the team that didn't do what the others did? I mean, 97, 96, even 99, you're talking about doubles. You're talking about shields and cups. You're talking about open cups and MLS cups. I mean, I understand that if you're just going to run them out there, that 98, maybe Doyle is the team that you think would win. They had the best regular season as far as just results go. I mean, 99 was ridiculous as well. Like, but can we give it to a team? Can we put them in the bracket for greatest teams of all time when they aren't the team that has the trophies? If you were going to give it to a team that has the actual hardware, which would it have been?
I mean, I would give it to 97.
Yeah.
It just like no disrespect to Thomas Rongen, who had a great, a great run as a coach in this league, but I'm giving it to the team that's coached by Bruce.
Yeah. I agree with Doyle. That's where I would have leaned if we're going with a team that won MLS Cup, if that's what we're picking through. So I agree. I
think you kind of have to do it. I think you have to give it to the team that won. I know your team trophies, Kalen, always have been, always will be.
Hashtag rings culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Win any.
19,
except the U.S. Open Cup. I did get that.
Yeah. 1997, DC United, I think, is going to be our entry. And, of course, there are at-large teams.
It should be 98. It should be 98.
Maybe we'll make it 98.
Doyle also picked the best U.S. men's national team memory. It was a loss as well to Germany. So the guy's just he's a hopeless romantic. What can you say?
Maybe 98 will get there for the at-large. We'll do like a reveal for those, like the NCAA tournament. But 97, DC United, 2007, Houston Dynamo, our first two entrants into the greatest MLS of all time, greatest team of all time bracket.
Do we have 7 seconds for me to mention one more thing?
Sure. We
mentioned Kevin Payne. Doyle talked about the model of South American players and Jaime Moreno and Marco Echeverri. Kevin Payne gets a lot of credit for not just going there for players, but allowing the culture in the stadium of fans, because a lot you hear is we want more Latin American fans in stadiums. We want them to feel comfortable and have a Latin American environment and all these things. And Kevin Payne was the first to put his money where his mouth was and build that culture and protect it and allow it to grow and all those things. And we don't mention him all the time, but I think he deserves credit for that.
And where are the bouncing stands at our Mount Rushmore?
RFK. RFK is still my favorite MLS stadium ever.
I mean, just standing in it when it was empty after it was, already decrepit, let's say.
That's the best part of it.
I know. Was an absolute honor. Walking through those tunnels felt like you were in a haunted house. Yeah. Like the fun kind. The kind that gets you're nervous, but you're excited. That was RFK.
You wanted to walk to the bathroom, but there was one bathroom right in the dugout that was closer to the pitch. But it was the worst one, so you did not want to go to that one. So you would have to calculate if you were a substitute or if it was halftime or whatever it was. Do I have to take the risk and go all the way back to the locker room, or do I use the dugout bathroom that's just not great? And if you are wearing white as the road team in Chicago, that's also another risk. Anyways, we won't go too far into it, but I would just say walking out into RFK was, the pitch was always amazing. I remember playing as like a young player in MLS on the wings and being right on that bouncing sideline of the Barra Brava and just being just like, wow, this is amazing, especially because of the quality of those sides, even throughout the mid 2000s when I was there.
All right, the Pantheon for DC United, their Mount Rushmore. It has been decided by extra time. Marco Echeverri, Jaime Moreno, Eddie Pope, Ben Olsen, the Bruce Arena observation deck.
Can we give a little shout out to Charlie Davies as well, just for, I know you went back to the club and had some big moments there too. So, obviously our fellow podcaster is not here today, but one of my favorite memories was him scoring those 2 goals back after his injury.
And also trying to jump in the car and it being locked. Icon.
You guys.
And also, I feel like that was like a little bit passive aggressive of Kalen for not mentioning him when we did the Dynamo segment. But
I just
shout out to my good friend Kalen Carr.
I just want to put there.
And Nguyen all the love. I'm sitting right here. Jeez.
No, Joseph Nguyen he played for Bayern Munich, sort of. So sorry, Kalen.
I love Joe. New York.
We also have to throw out that DC is such a good club that there was a year in which own goal 4 goals was their top goal scorer, and they still won Open Cup that year. Nothing about DC makes sense, except that they have history.
Can we just shout out the legend, Louis Neal?
Yeah, there it is.
There it is. There's the shout out. All right, Toronto FC.
And I believe our good friends over at Spit and Fire Pod will be doing a Mount Rushmore with just 2 players on it. That'll be Taylor Kemp and Chris Korbes. So keep an eye out for that.
See, that's where you make a mistake because there are 3 on it, and the third is Chris Korbes' shin guards. Let's do Toronto FC. Producer Anders is getting in my text messages saying, hurry it up. I'll get this started for Toronto. Their Mount Rushmore, their Pantheon. It has to start, in my opinion, with Michael Bradley. You can't talk about the modern era of Toronto FC, which is to say the era with any success whatsoever, without mentioning Michael Bradley's name. What he was when he came to Toronto was, I think, in many ways more than what most other, if not all, American players had accomplished at that time in Europe and otherwise. What he'd done for the national team, the big moments, the big goals, but also what he'd done at the club level. All due respect to everybody else who did it for years and years, because there's a laundry list of guys who went to Europe and made a name for themselves. But I always thought what Michael did was unique in a lot of ways, because he didn't go to someplace comfortable and stay there. He didn't go someplace where language was going to be easy for him. He went somewhere at an age which we weren't accustomed to seeing American players going, to Heerenveen when he was a teenager, and he learned Dutch. And he scored goals, and he became a big part of that team. And then he didn't stay. He moved. He went to Mönchengladbach. That didn't work out as long as maybe you might have expected, but he had some big times, some big years at one of the biggest clubs in Germany. He learned the language again. He integrated himself into the culture again, and then did it all over again in Italy. So when he arrived, he was coming off some Roma teams that were really good, and he was a big part of, and he'd become sort of a cult hero. And he came to a team that was frankly bad. They were trying to be a bloody big deal, but it was bloody bad for so many years. Just awful. Just a joke. Whether it be the final day of the regular season against the Red Bulls, missing the playoffs, whether it be just the years of famine and the fans still showing up. When I first started following the league, Toronto FC was the team that was like downtown, that was cool, that had supporters. It was like them in DC in a lot of ways. And they maintained that for a lot of years without any success. And then Michael got there, and he really helped establish what became a championship-winning culture. And he became a part of the city. You see it in their tifo. You see it in the way that they treat him and think about him. He is El Capitan. He's the man. And you cannot start their Mount Rushmore, their Pantheon, without having his head chiseled in there. So Michael Bradley, the first one in. The second one in, Dave, got to be the Atomic Ant, no?
I know that I don't have as many years as Doyle, so Doyle can get mad at me. For peak player at their time in MLS, I still think Sebastian Giovinco is the best player in MLS history. When he hit the ground running in 15 and 16, he could do things that no one else could do. You talk about molds and who did you say?
Carlos Vela.
Yeah, of course. And you can say that, but it's still an argument. It's not locked down that what Giovinco did for TFC wasn't as good or better with the players around him and the system around him than what Vela's done. But he was also, I think, a game changer in that to come at his age, at 27, 28 years old from Juventus, where other Champions League teams were dying to have him. He chose to come to Toronto, create something new, create something different. And in my mind, that still is, I know Beckham has his lore. It's what has led to where we're at now, which is you don't sign over 30 DPs. You sign guys who are difference makers, who can be around for a while, who then you can build around and create great teams, not just 3 DPs and pieces around them. I still go back to him flying to Italy for a Euro qualifying game, coming back, getting off the plane, coming off the bench and scoring a banger to help them clinch a playoff spot, because that's how much it meant to him. He had 22 goals and 16 assists in his first year in MLS and won MVP. And I think Bradley set a culture, as a captain and coming first. But I think Giovinco was the quality, was the class that took it to a level, which was this team is going to legitimately not just be a great MLS team. They're going to challenge in the region. And eventually we hope that MLS clubs are challenging around the world. And a lot of that started for me with Giovinco coming and with the quality that he played with. And I always loved him as a player in Italy. I always thought he was a great player. It was too bad that he was behind Del Piero for so long and kind of got stuck with the comparisons because he was a Juve guy and the size and all those things. But I'll watch his highlight reel any day of the week and just sit there and enjoy it.
I think that Vela has surpassed him. What Vela did last year is like we've never seen anything. Arguably Joseph has as well. But that 2015, that 2015 season in particular, and then following it up the way he did in 2016 before falling off a little bit for his final 2 years, he was the league hadn't seen anything like that. The league, 22 goals, 16 assists, and then I think 17, 15 in year 2. Along with Bradley and this other guy I'm about to mention, he elevated what had been the worst team in MLS history into what we now think of in the TAM era as one of the guiding lights, one of the best teams in the league. And Giovinco was a huge part of that. If we were doing Pantheon individual seasons, that 2015 season is a Pantheon season. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to throw in the Tigres free kick as well.
Yeah, the Tigres free kick is one of the all-time great MLS.
Well, that's a part of it too, and that's the piece that I think if you were to make an argument between the two, and you wanted to go with Giovinco, is the fact that he's won MLS Cups, and then also I think the run in the Champions League as well is a differentiator in the case for Giovinco in this case. And it's funny you mentioned those guys because he had some of the sort of incredible plays that Vela has, but he's got he's a little guy, but he has more of the Joseph Martinez personality as far as being getting in guys' faces and actually maybe even a little more confrontational. So I mean, he's got to be up there for sure. And I think that's when I look at it. TFC is a complicated club to do in a lot of ways because their existence has been sort of bifurcated in these two completely different eras where they don't actually even look like the same club. The first club is one club that had all this new energy and was this expansion team, like a lot of MLS expansion teams, but their history completely shifted really at that inflection point that we already went through with Michael Bradley and Giovinco, and then I think the third name on the list for me, which would be Jozy Altidore. So that's to me that's those guys, and then I wonder if where that fourth, it starts getting complicated like most of these lists beyond that.
Before Doyle does Jozy, can I get one more thing in here, which is when you were in Mexico or watching Mexican media or anything like that around the TFC CCL run, and this I think is BS, but it's the way they saw it. They all said, oh, MLS isn't growing. TFC's not a great team. This is Giovinco magic. That's how they saw it in Mexico, and they saw him as a player who was outside of MLS, whose ability was on a different level. Hence, we had the rumors that Tigres, Monterrey, and Club America all wanted to sign him year after year. That just shows you the level that he was perceived outside of MLS. Sorry.
Jozy Altidore had some of those rumors too, not as strong. Doyle, make the case for Jozy.
I mean, the case for Jozy is we don't talk about Giovinco having an MLS Cup if not for Jozy. Giovinco wasn't the best player, certainly in the 2016 run, which obviously they lost. Giovinco wasn't the best player. Michael Bradley wasn't the best player. Nobody else on that team was the best player during that playoff run. It was Jozy Altidore. If you go back and you watch that comeback against Montreal, that's Jozy. They had no way of handling him. He utterly dominated that playoffs. 2017, he was injured through most of those playoffs, only really got healthy near the end. But who had the series winner against Columbus in 2017? It was Jozy. Who had the game-winning goal in the 2017 MLS Cup? It was Jozy. And look, we all know the knock with Jozy. He's been there. This is his 6th year. He's played more than 2,000 minutes once. He just can't stay healthy. When he stays healthy, his goals per 90 with Toronto is, I think, higher than what David Villa's was with NYCFC. And the difference between those two guys is that Jozy actually did it in the playoffs. Jozy has been like we saw it last year. MLS Cup, he's walking around. He's got to get on the field for 20 minutes in MLS Cup. Dragging his leg around. He still scores a goal. Jozy has been, when healthy, an MVP caliber center forward in this league, and it's a shame that he hasn't been healthy often enough to make that unquestionable. But there is no argument against him. There's no real argument against him being in this pantheon for Toronto FC.
All right, from the Greg Vanney observation deck, I think that's a pretty safe assumption, right? Yeah, comes in.
Aaron Vinter and Mo Johnston are close.
Sorry, the Aaron Vinter restrooms facility. Yeah, look, Greg Vanney changed this club in a lot of ways. He provided structure. He also provided a focus on youth that he brought from Chivas USA. So Greg Vanney observation deck, you see Michael Bradley, you see Sebastian Giovinco, you see Jozy Altidore staring back at you. And here's where it gets hard. I mean, Mo Adu built their training center. So you got to throw Mo Adu in there. But then you're kind of picking and choosing. Do you go back to the old era and some of the guys like Danny Dichio or Covermans or Terry Dunfield or, I don't know, Jim Brennan or maybe even Torsten Frings in Costa Rica? I'm just kidding.
You don't bring back anything from that era. You say thank you for trying to save that. Like guys like Dero had some bangers, but those clubs were no.
Doyle, what is the greatest moment in TFC history between 2007 and 2015?
Oh, easily the seat cushion moment.
And who scored the goal? Danny Dichio, a.k.a. Mount Rushmore Dichio. Chisel his face in.
No.
Dero should be on the Mount Rushmore for every club.
Yeah. Vancouver Whitecaps, Dwayne De Rosario.
Right. But no, like you have to you pick a fourth. If you're going to pick a fourth player, you pick a fourth player from this last 5 years. And to me, it comes down to two. It's either Justin Morrow, who's been arguably the best left back in the league. He was certainly the best left back in MLS for the decade of the 2010s, whether it was early on with San Jose or then the last 5-6 years with Toronto FC. He was, I think, second in Defender of the Year voting in 2017, and fullbacks never come close to winning Defender of the Year. He was fantastic that year. The other option would be Jonathan Osorio, which is like, it's a little weird because he hasn't been a full-time starter and his progress hasn't been linear, but damn, in the biggest moments, he's been really, really good. And I think the fact that he is a homegrown player, that maybe pushes him over the top.
That's where I.
But get out of here with discussions of guys nobody from the first 7 or 8 years. All due respect to Mo Adu, nobody
Mista?
from that era.
I'm so confused. I'm so confused.
Rudy, the Toronto FC version.
Yeah.
João Plata. He was good in CCO. I'm just saying.
Oh my goodness.
It's probably Chad Barrett.
I think Danny Dichio for sure has a case because when he came to the club, beginning that club. Actually, funny story. He came and trained with the Chicago Fire in preseason in Florida when I was there, and I was hoping we were going to sign him. I don't know what happened, or if Toronto had allocate. This is a whole. I don't know how it all happened, but ended up going to Toronto, and then ironically, the first game, the opener for Toronto, was at home against the Chicago Fire, and I was playing in a game when the seat cushions all came down and Danny scored against us. I don't know if it was he had extra motivation because maybe it didn't work out with the Fire. It was supposed to. That's a whole piece of history that I have never actually asked him about.
Kalen, he had extra motivation because they hadn't scored a goal. That
is true.
Motivation. All right, who we going with? We going Osorio? We going Dicchio?
I am going to go with Osorio. I think, to Doyle's point, this new era, what this club has done, just not even for themselves, but also pushing the league forward. And then I think Oso's emergence as a star there with them and with the Canada national team. I think for this Canadian clubs, having a homegrown player means something a little bit different than even for some of the other MLS clubs in the States as far as their pride. And I think Oso, especially when you project forward, I think probably already, but especially when you look ahead, I think I would go for him.
I think that was well summed up.
I agree with everything Kalen said. I thought what Doyle said, which I really lock in on, is he plays big in the biggest games. He wasn't a starter in 2016, and the best game he played of his pro career was the final at that point. And then
that was 2017.
2017, right. And then he comes back, and I thought he was the best player on the team in 18, which was a tough year. And I thought he was the best player in the playoff run this year, or maybe one behind Pozuelo, whatever it is. So I think he's carried the team when Josie has been hurt and when Michael hasn't been at his best at times. I agree everything about being a local guy. And I also think over the next 3-4 years, like, we're going to see that he is going to entrench himself at the top of all the appearance lists, maybe assists, stuff like that.
All right, there you have it, our Pantheon, our Mount Rushmore. This, as we observed from the Tim Leiweke Visitors Center, because you cannot talk about the bloody big deal and the shift that this club made without Tim Leiweke. Tim Bezpachenko also has
Does Defoe get a shout in here for changing perception and blah, blah, blah?
No, he gets just a shout. He gets a quick shout. Although he was absolutely dominant when he first got here. It was crazy. He was just
hated Seattle, so he scored against them.
Yeah. They always remember what happens in Seattle.
What about Stephen Fry? I think he should get a shout as well too for that club. Although it's exactly the case of him.
No one from that era deserves a shout.
The goalkeeper, if anybody. Come on.
He was abused. He was abused in that era. Everything he went through made him the man he is now.
I think we'll see Stephen Fry when we get to Seattle.
All right, there you have the four: Michael Bradley, Sebastian Giovinco, Josie Altidore, and for us, Jonathan Osorio. Greg Vanney is our coach. I think the best team, I don't even think we need to argue this, do we? It's got to be 2017. It's got to be the treble, and I guess maybe you could carry that into CCL, but even standing on its own, 2017, the treble had, it was the greatest team of all time at that moment, regular season-wise, and they capped it with all the things you're supposed to cap it with, which is championships, final success. I mean, it's 2017, no discussion.
But for the sake of the bracket, I think you have to put the 18 CCL run in with the 17 team because they did things other teams hadn't done. And 17,
your Canadian bias is showing.
Yeah, look at all the jerseys on the back; they're all Canadian. I put Lawrence Simon jersey on a pillow here. It's my Marsh pillow that I can hang out with. But I will just say, you had, because we didn't mention it, obviously not going to be an all-time great, but Victor Vasquez was a part of that group and was one of the cleanest players in the league and changed what they were able to do. You talk about Marky Delgado as well, who borderline national team player that was in and around those teams. Stephen Beitashour and Justin Morrow, both a part of those groups. Drew
You're
Moore.
Missing a name. You're missing a name. Drew Moore.
Yeah. So, So those it's going to be probably, I think they're going to be in the Final Four for the best teams in MLS history.
All right, we got to get out of here. Producer Anders says that the export is going to be, quote, absolute hell. Why are you doing this to me? I may have made that quote up. But we'll get to your mail. Colt from Topeka. We also have stuff from Shannon about MLS books for people to read while they're bored on quarantine. And Doug Bradley had a good email about the all-time MLS Loathed 11. So if you have candidates for the Loathed 11, let us know. If you have books that Shannon should read specifically about MLS history, and any memories from the U.S. national team or otherwise, send them our way, 401-206-0MLS, extratime at MLSsoccer.com. It's been a pleasure being back with you guys. We've done our first 3 Mount Rushmore / Pantheon / all-time teams. I'll have Cameron draw some names out of a hat to decide our next 3. So look forward to that hashtag content very, very soon. That's it for us. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Stay safe. Do the right thing. We're thinking about all of you and your families and your friends. We hope everything is okay in your neck of the woods.
And
stay healthy.
Pray for Kalen's relationship.
Yes. Also, Kalen, we hope that you and your girlfriend are able to make up.
He has sacrificed more for this show than any of us.
Exactly. All right, guys. Until next time.